So let's scroll down to see what needs to be implemented. So this is good. These two are good. And we need to implement the get role enum name. So here, all I have to do is return. So we're gonna do role, which is coming from our enum, and then we're gonna do value of, and then we're gonna pass in that string. So role to uppercase. Okay, so that's all we have to do here. So this is gonna return the role for that specific role name. So if this right here is like user, like a string like this, like so, right? So if we pass in user here as the string, it's gonna return the role user here. So that's all we're doing here. So this is done. Now we have to do the save profile image. The first thing is we have to check to make sure that we actually get an image. So we're gonna do if the profile image, right, is not null. Because if it's null, then we don't need to do anything. So null, and then we're gonna execute our code. Okay, so if this is null, so it's gonna come here, oops, this is null, and it's gonna jump here, and then it's gonna end the execution of the code that we're gonna have in the if statement. The reason this is important is because we're gonna be manipulating the file and the file system, and these operations are usually time consuming. So you have to make sure that you optimize this as much as possible. So once we know that we have an image, right, or what are we gonna do? So we have to find the folder for that specific user where the image is located, and then if they already have an existing one, and then delete that existing image, and then replace that image with the new image that they provided. So the first thing is to find the location of that user folder. So we're gonna do path, and we need to find that user folder. So user folder, and here we're gonna do paths dot get, and then we're gonna pass in the user folder, which is the base URI. So user folder, and then here we're gonna concatenate the username. So we're gonna do user.get username, and then we're gonna do to absolute path, to absolute path, and then we need to just normalize this. Okay, so this right here is gonna give us the user folder, which is gonna look something like this, like user, like home, and then the user folder here, which is like support portal. Like if you remember, it's gonna be support portal, so it's gonna be like this. So we can see, so it's gonna be like this, and then it's gonna have the username. So if the username is Rick, it's gonna be like Rick, like this. Yeah? So that's the path, the user folder that we're looking for, which is why we pass in the base for the user folder, and then their username, and then like this. Okay, so we're gonna delete this. So once we have the path, we have to make sure that there's something there, like at least we know we found the actual path. Otherwise, when we try to save the picture, it's not gonna save because the path doesn't exist. So we're gonna do if, we're gonna do files, oops, not that, and we're gonna do exist, right? And then here we're gonna pass in the user folder. Okay, so we're checking to see if it exists or not. So if it doesn't exist, which is why I put the exclamation point here to negate this, we're gonna create it. So we're gonna do files that create directories, and then here we're gonna pass in the user folder. Okay, so like this. So if the file doesn't exist, we have to create the directories for that. So we're gonna create this path, which is pretty much what we're doing here. So let's put a logger here. Let's do logger.info, and we can do directory created, just so we know when something happened. And we don't need this, like this, and this throws an exception. So all we're doing is trying to find this path, right, using the base folder path and then the actual username. And if it doesn't exist, we're gonna go ahead and create it. Okay, so we try to find if the path exists. if it exists, we'll skip this if statement. If it doesn't, which is what we're doing here, then we're gonna create it. Okay, because when we try to save the picture, if this doesn't exist, the whole operation is gonna fail. So once we know that we actually have a path, we can do files, and then we can do delete if exists. Okay, so we're gonna delete everything that already exists if there is anything there. So we can call paths and then get, and then here we're gonna pass in the user folder, and then we also need to pass in the user.get username, because that's where the actual file is going to be. And then after that, we're gonna pass in the dat and the extension. So we're gonna do JPG extension. Okay, so that way we can delete the actual picture if it already exists. So here we need the plus sign. Okay, so we're gonna delete the file if it exists, and it's important that you don't just use delete here, because if it doesn't exist, then this is gonna fail and it's gonna cause an exception, and this whole process will fail. Okay, so it's important that you use the delete if exist on the files class. So once we know that we delete everything if there was an existing file there, then we can save our file. So here we're gonna call file, and then we're gonna make it happy. And then once all we have to do is to pass in the stream and the actual location. So here we can get the profile image and then get the actual input stream, okay, which represent the actual data. And then here we can pass in the folder. So we're going to use our folder, and then resolved, and then here we pass in the user that get username. Oops, get username, and then we have to add in the dot so that we can form the actual picture. And then here we pass in the extension. So the extension. Okay, so that should be everything we need to do to actually save the picture. And just to be safe, we're gonna do replace underscore existing. So this is another parameter that you can pass here. So and if you go in there, you can see it's coming from the standard copy options enum. So what it's doing is it's just really replacing the existing picture. So if there was already a picture by that name and that folder, is gonna remove it, which is what we're doing here. So this is definitely gonna delete it. We can either do this line here or just add replace existing, but I'm doing both just so that I'm like, you know, super sure that we're gonna delete anything if it exists. And then once we do that, then we have to set the new location of that picture on that user. So let's see if we can do, let's do user, oops, and then set profile image URL. So we're gonna set a new URL. So let's create a new function. So set profile image URL, and then here we pass in the username. So user.get username. Okay, and then after that, since we changed the property on the user, we can go ahead and set the user. So let's call the user repository, save, and then here we're gonna set the user. Oops. And let's just put a logger here just so we know when things happen, just for debugging purposes. So it's the logger info, and here we're gonna pass in file save in the system, and we can also put in the actual file name. So we're gonna call the profile image get original file name. Okay, so that's gonna give us the original file name here. And of course we have to create this method. So set profile image URL,